Welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange Podcast. Stories by leaders for leaders to help you raise the bar on your own excellence, to release the potential inside of you. Now, here's today's podcast. Greetings. This is Hugh Ballou, founder and president of SynerVision. It's where synergy activates your vision. You build team synergy. And oddly enough, we're going to talk about teams today, leading teams. Leadership is where it needs to be. Nothing happens without leadership. You're listening to the Nonprofit Exchange podcast that we've started 8.5 years ago. This is episode 351, a very unique episode, but a very important episode. And as you know, I spent a career as a musical conductor, and I know about high performing teams. And we have an expert today who's Kevin Herring. And Kevin, welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange. And please tell our listeners something about you so they know who you are.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show. So I have been in a consulting practice for about 25 years, and we've been working with clients to help them turn around teams, build high-performing business units, and most of that work has been in person. I would just preface sort of that explanation with kind of what got me there, and that is that I started with in college with a pretty clear desire to be able to help build better places for people to work, where they could find meaning and purpose and contribute at high levels and contribute to the success of the business and create better businesses as a result. And so that's kind of where my focus was. And I went through graduate school and went on to work in a consulting firm and then later in industry in various leadership roles. Had the opportunity to work in a very unique situation with a company called Magma Copper Company that went through an entire corporate-wide transformation that was written about in journal articles and books, and we had tours, and it was kind of a circus at times, but we had people from Harvard Business come and make a movie about us in action, and it was really a fun time. But that kind of launched me into a desire to really work with other experts and help businesses to make those kinds of transformations more quickly and more effectively, which has kind of been our passion. Really want to build great places where people can feel fulfilled at work, satisfied with what they contribute each day, be happy to go to work and not be miserable like so many people are when they're demotivated when they go to work.
Demotivated, my goodness. My co-host is David Dunworth on the Nonprofit Exchange. He's the board chair of SynerVision Leadership Foundation. We talk about high-performing teams a lot. And so we're both going to ask you some questions to see if we can get at the heart of what people can do. So let's start out with, what is a high-performing team? How do you define that?
That's a great question. I was in an organization one time where somebody said, we really have a high performing team. And I said, okay, so what is the way that you determine them, and what indicates that you have a high performing team? Because this team, in fact, was working on a very critical project for the organization. They were over $1 million behind, over budget, and 6 or 8 months behind schedule. And by every practical measure, they were a dysfunctional, low performing team, but they thought they were high performing. And so I think it's important for people to understand that most people are not working in a high performing team because their organizations are not set up to support that. And so high performance is really where people are achieving at top levels, where they're working together, they're passionate about coming to work, and they're looking for ways to improve the work, and they show great results. They improve some of the key indicators of success, things like high customer delight. Those who are being served by the organization are delighted with what they're getting. The cycle times, response times are short, and people are able to improve on those on a consistent basis. quality of product or service is high by marketplace measures or indicators. The organization is financially sound and secure as a result. If you're a nonprofit, then you're fulfilling your mission. That's something that's unique to nonprofits. For-profits have missions, but they can change pretty dramatically and frequently at times. Most people don't realize 3M stands for Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing. Most of them think of it as a postal note company, or Post-it note company. But reality is they have changed their mission many times, as have a lot of other organizations. But nonprofits tend to have a pretty stable mission that was driven by the founder's passion and those who contribute to and participate in that organization. So high performance is shown by the results they achieve, the high engagement that employees have when they do the work.
So you talk about your experience in business, and we teach nonprofit leaders that you are, in fact, not in a for-profit business, but a for-purpose business. So we invite business leaders like you to share some business secrets, because we need to install those in our organization, because if we're not creating positive cash flow, good revenue, we're going to not exist in the future. So exactly. A mission is important, but a team around it. So, thinking about the ins and outs of the high-performing team, the Gallup surveys point out repeatedly that 70% of the workforce, this is not your management, but your workforce, your teams, are either disengaged or highly disengaged, which costs corporations $500 billion in wasted money in that middle piece. And leaders, I think, are oblivious to that. Why is that?
I think it's difficult for people to see the connection sometimes, and in large part because of a lot of myths that have been floating around about leadership and what's important for leaders to do to impact the business. But we know the Gallup survey is actually the more optimistic of those that are out there. Some say it's worse than that. But when you think about, that's the high end of the scale, that we have. The vast majority of people who go to work each day are disengaged, demotivated. And we've known about this for years. This is nothing new. HR departments have been trying to tackle this thing for over decades, I would say, and still struggle with it. I mean, we just haven't made a lot of progress. And I think we haven't made a lot of progress in large part because we tend to be focusing on the wrong things. When we look at the popular literature about motivation, for instance, it's all about extrinsic motivators. It's about trying to connect the right incentive to the right person. And if we get a good match, then they'll be motivated, as if they're objects to be manipulated and so on. And that's just not how you build a high performing team. That's how you build a high compliance team. People who do what they have to do to keep their jobs, and they might have a momentary rush of excitement when you hit that right neurotransmitter or something, but that's not high performance. High performance comes when people are intrinsically motivated. You have to create the conditions for people not to be held accountable or pressured to do the work or manipulated to do the work. You create high performance when people are choosing high levels of accountability and commitment. They're of their own volition. I mean, they are passionate about coming to work and doing the work, finding ways to satisfy those who are served by the organization, finding ways to shorten cycle times, improve processes, those kinds of things. When they're in that mode, they can perform at a high level. And most leadership leaders do not focus on those things. They focus on the easy things, because trying to create high engagement requires a lot of effort and change by the leader. And it's whole lot easier to say, the problem's not me, it's them. We need to fix them. And so that's where the focus goes.
I see David nodding his head. David, I don't think there could be a better answer to that. And you could take all of those problems, and in the nonprofit context, they're magnified. It's a lot harder because you don't have the leverage of a paycheck. David, what do you think?
Well, I follow this one gal. I've followed her since I got on LinkedIn, and she's tremendous with regard to human resource insights and so forth. And one of the most dynamic things that I've seen her quote out there is that people don't leave businesses, they leave the leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Absolutely.
where I think things fall apart. Well, you know what? We talked about demotivated people. My brother years ago started talking about being sick, being nauseous on Sunday, always around 5 o'clock on Sunday. And that's because Monday was just around the corner and he didn't like what he was doing, didn't like his job, didn't like his boss, and so forth. So how do you motivate people like that? And who's responsible for it? Can you enlighten us a little bit on that?
That's a great question, because in almost every leader's job description is the responsibility to motivate the team and to hold people accountable. And so let me give you 5 myths. I'm gonna just point some of these out to you. 5 myths that are perpetuated constantly in organizations across the country, probably across the world. But we have HR leaders, unfortunately, who are complicit in this. One is it's a leader's job to motivate people. That is a myth. Leaders don't have a magic wand that they could just wave to instantly engage everybody's motivation. People have to motivate themselves. Now, sure, we could try to motivate people. And what happens when we try to motivate people? Well, that's another myth, that it's an effective leadership practice, because immediately when you start trying to motivate people, you're manipulating people. You're focusing on extrinsic motivators. And the third myth I'd point out is, do people really need or want to be motivated? I've had roomfuls of people where I've asked this question: how many of you need somebody to motivate you? I've never seen a hand go up. Never. Right? I've asked, how many of you want somebody to motivate you? I've never seen a hand go up, ever. But I have heard people complain that they hate it when people try to motivate them. They hate it when leaders try to motivate them. And this isn't just people in leadership group. This is frontline employees say the same thing. I don't need someone to motivate me. Thank you very much. I can handle that. So they don't want to be motivated. They don't need to be motivated. What they need is for a leader to create the conditions that enable them to choose commitment and accountability. That's what they need. They need a place that enables them to flourish as a person and to contribute like they want to do, that taps their already inherent intrinsic motivation. Most people come to work already self-motivated. And here's what happened. We talked about demotivation. So if you've ever read any research done by Kim Cameron and Dave Wetton, a couple of colleagues of mine, they just do some great research, and they sort of coined the phrase that demotivation is a learned response. And think about it. You've got a new job, you're going to work for a new company, you're all excited, and you have a high expectations. You expect that your boss is going to support you and give you the resources and the freedom to use those resources to do your job, that you're going to have the decision authority, the latitude that you need to bring your ideas, your expertise to bear on situations. You're going to grow and you're going to contribute at a high level. You're all excited about it. What happens? Well, you start the first week. You find out that something doesn't work out. Your boss doesn't support you. Your boss throws you under the bus. Says, you blew it. You messed up. When in fact, it wasn't, you didn't do anything wrong. You were doing the right things. Maybe you find that you need resources to do your job, and you're told, well, you just have to make do. You can't have access to those resources. Oh, and by the way, those new ideas you have, you can't really use those there if you're too different. If you do something that's too foreign to the people that work here, then they won't embrace those concepts. So you need to just do the things we've done in the past. Keep things pretty status quo, and don't excite things too much. I mean, you start hearing those things, what happens? You lose motivation. You become gradually demotivated as those expectations that you had coming into the job are unmet. And so that's the thing that we need to recognize, is that that's how we lose people. That's how they lose motivation. Yeah, go ahead.
It's amazing. We've interviewed some really top leaders like you, and we have synergy, use of the word synergy, around these themes. So we teach the same thing. You know, if you try to motivate people, it lasts as long as the doorway to the exit the room. You know, they get all hip and they go out. But really, you give them meaningful work and you do the things you're talking about. That's motivation if people feel like they're making a difference. So,
Absolutely.
let's talk about. I find that leaders are sometimes apprehensive in addressing issues, making course corrections or correcting people. And sometimes, well, let's talk about the mythical thing called conflict in the workplace or in a nonprofit. You know, it's there, but what do we do to our contribution to it? How do we set it up as leaders unknowingly, unwillingly, and we don't want to do it, and then how do we make it worse instead of better?
Great question. And it's important to recognize, first of all, that conflict is essential for progress. Right? If we're all agreeing to the same things all the time, why would we ever change anything? We need people to raise difficult issues, to confront things that aren't working, confront the status quo. We need to have differences of opinion and discussions about those things. So conflict isn't inherently bad. We have to have it to progress. And so I always tell people a couple things about conflict. First of all, we need it to progress, and we also need to embrace it, because by learning about other people's perspectives and concerns, it helps us to address those needs. Right? Change is a great opportunity to do that. When we get into any kind of change, especially when it's a forced kind of a change, because the marketplace demands it, or regulations change, or something about the environment has shifted, and we all have to adjust to it, then that's an opportunity for us to hear people out, hear their complaints, their concerns, their worries, get those out on the table, embrace the opportunity to have those conversations, because now we can kind of dive deep and see what's really at the heart of people's concerns. And we can confront those, we can address them, we can have conversations about them and work through them with people. But there are always inherently, when we have more than one person in a group, we're going to have differences of opinion if people are being honest. And we want people to be honest. And so how do we deal with that? Well, I think it's always critical for us to acknowledge other people as having a legitimate perspective. I had a colleague who used to use the example of a glass of water. He'd set it on the table, and it would be filled to the mid-level of the glass, and he'd say, or a can of soda maybe, or something, and he'd say, "What do you see?" And people would describe from their perspective what they saw. They may describe the other side of the can, or they may describe that the glass is half empty. And somebody else will describe the other side of the can, or the fact that it's half full. And we say, well, is anybody wrong here? No, nobody's wrong. Everybody's absolutely correct in what they're describing. We can verify all that, that the data is accurate. What we're seeing are different points of view. And it's important to acknowledge that those points of view are every bit as legitimate as ours. We also have to acknowledge that people interpret things differently because of their life experience. And I know that other people might have had experiences that lead them to their conclusions that I would never accept as my own, because my life experience has been different, or maybe I've made different choices, and so we've come to arrive at different conclusions. But that doesn't make that other person's view any less relevant or valid. And so we want to teach people how to work together better, to accept conflict as a necessary part of working together, but learn how to channel it constructively. So we learn to understand each other better, and we learn to take those points of view and use them to shape a future that we can all align around and support.
And moving toward conflict and staying calm and addressing the facts is so important. So many leaders I know shy away from conflict, which really accelerates it. something that's minor becomes nuclear because you've ignored it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I see David's formulating a question, but I'm going to slip one in before I give him a chance to ask it. So we see in the work that we've been doing for 35 years that you talked about myths. We've been taught the wrong things about leadership. And so leaders get bad advice. So let's hone in on the bad advice about teams. So what kind of bad advice do leaders get, and what should they be hearing?
Almost everywhere that I go, I hear people tell their leaders, if they're struggling, having a struggling team, or they're struggling as a leader, they tell them, here's what you got to do if you want to increase performance in your team. You need to sit down with each individual. You need to clarify expectations, and you need to hold people more accountable. Now, I don't know about you, but I have never, ever in my entire long career seen any high performing team come out of that. Have you?
No.
Right. No, it doesn't happen. That's a compliance driving kind of approach.
That's the boss model. You spell boss backwards with double SOB. That's not good.
I have never heard that before. So that is,
sorry,
but that's absolutely true. That is all about compliance. That's about using power and authority to try to pressure people to doing something. You're not going to get high performance out of that. There's no passion behind that. There's no engagement behind that, right? We talked about employee engagement is really the key. As Gallup has shown, is the key to high performance. In fact, the Gallup survey, I believe, said that high engagement organizations have 20-some% higher productivity. I think average of 21% higher profitability. Engagement is the key. And what is the key to high engagement? The leader is the key to high engagement, because it's about creating the conditions for people to engage at high levels, to choose to be accountable for the success of the whole team and the whole business unit. That's what engagement is all about. People being passionate and committed to the success of the whole. It's just like when you see in a sports team, which is always a great analogy, because those are businesses too. And we look at professional sports, look at like this last Super Bowl. I know we talked a lot about what caused a team to gel so that it performs at such a high level. Well, that's a high performing team. That's a team where everybody has chosen accountability for the success of the whole team. And when there's a broken play or a ball bouncing around the field, people don't just stand around saying, gee, I hope the right person picks that up and does something with it. They act on their own to fix it, because they have decided they're accountable for the success of that team on that day. And they act in accordance with that. And that's what we're talking about. If we stop telling leaders that to be a good leader, you need to hold people accountable, you need to clarify expectations and all that nonsense, and tell them instead, what you need to do is sit down with your team and teach them the business, teach them the bigger picture, teach them the mission, the larger vision of the organization, what it is that we're trying to accomplish, how we stack up against others who are trying to do similar things, what gives us the advantage, and how we can make a difference, and help them understand how they can work together better to do those things, and create a situation where they can choose commitment and collaboration and service to each other in the interest of the success of the larger group. If they can do those kinds of things, they'll truly be a great leader, and they will get higher performance from their team.
I love it. Love it. In a minute, we're going to show your website and you can tell people why they should go there. But David, what do you think of this?
I think it's pretty insightful, and it draws a lot of, because I'm, a senior executive type of person, draws on a lot of thoughts of things that I did well and things that I didn't do too well. And it's always good to hear, a fresh perspective. And it also made me think that Dr. Stephen Covey used to talk about most people, rather than listening to understand, listen, and their mind is formulating the response they're going to give them rather than try to understand it. And he also talked about the Native American talking stick and how the performance around that goes. And I think do you think that those types of things, by learning better listening skills and allowing people to talk until their point is clear, do you think that a leader can increase employee engagement that way, or is that
Absolutely.
based on that?
Absolutely. That's a great comment. I mean, I think that great leaders are humble leaders. They listen. They try to learn from others. Leadership is a journey, like any other aspect of life. It's a learning process. None of us woke up one day and had all the great attributes of a great leader. We had to develop them, and we make mistakes along the way in our efforts to do that. But it's important to develop some critical skills. And one is to be able to listen. We use a thing we call ask, don't tell. Stop telling people what to do. Stop giving them the answers. Stop solving their problems. Instead, start asking questions. Give them a chance to think through things and to be the problem solver. Develop or build self-reliance in individuals and in their teams so that they can tackle things on their own and not have to come to you for every little thing. Don't be afraid to be wrong about things. Make it psychologically safe for people to be able to raise difficult issues or to challenge you in your decisions. How often have you made a bad decision and people were afraid to say anything? I mean, I want people to tell me if I'm doing something dumb. I don't want to do something dumb if I don't have to, right? Yeah. I can learn the hard way, but I'd rather learn the easy way.
Got it. So David, it's interesting. Every single point he's making are things that we teach nonprofits, but it's good to hear from another source.
Always.
So Kevin, that was a great question, David. So people can find you at superchargemyteam.com. And that's an easy to remember URL, and it takes them to Ascent Management Consulting. What will they find when they go to that website?
Yeah, when you go to superchargemyteam.com, like Hugh says, it'll take you to the website. You have access to articles. We have a learning center where we have all kinds of articles that we've written about leadership and teams and how to develop high-performing teams. We have other information about offerings, and you also find a place where you can get tools. There are free tools you can do. We have what we call a sort of speed dating exercise that you do with your team to help people to learn to serve each other, to understand what each other needs and make commitments around those things. So you have access to that sort of thing. You have a lot of information, and I think opportunity to get onto our newsletter and receive more on a regular basis too.
And that's consistent with leadership is the key. People teach about how to do this. Here's your board performance strategy. Here's your messaging, all of these components. But really, if you haven't worked on yourself and your ability to lead, it doesn't matter. You got a lot of tools without the ability to use them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I want to build the capacity of leaders so that they can learn to build the capacity of their teams. And as leaders find that they build great teams, people have great experiences where people are having a great experience every day when they come to work. They want to share that with others, and they'll do that. And you'll build leadership within your team and build people's capabilities to be able to take over when you move on to something else. I mean, that's really a leader's responsibility, is to build a team full of potential leaders who can do that elsewhere.
Amen. If nobody's following you, you're not a leader. So this has been chock full of great sound bites, great tips. People can take this information and utilize it right away. So before you give a piece of advice or charge for people, we're going to talk about our community. Center Vision Leadership Foundation has a community for faith leaders and nonprofit leaders, and you can find it at nonprofitcommunity.org. So David, why should people join? That's the free portal, and you can get a taste of networking with others. But then, if you like, then we can graduate you into another. But why should they start on that site, David, and connect with people around the world?
Well, our Center Vision community is both a free and a paid service offering. We have a lot of content, a lot of networking capabilities. You'll meet others of like ilk, and we provide a lot of good information. Every month we produce a 30-page what we don't like the word newsletter, but we call it the updates. Here's what's going on, and we have a little fun. We have a joke section. We got always a huge recipe because he's such a great cook. And then articles. We always ask for guest contributors. And so if you would like to have something to put into our monthly periodical, by all means, we'll allow you to have a guest contributor spot. You can then, that's another marketing tool that you can use. It not only helps you get your message out to new audiences, but also gives yourself a little bit more digital footprint.
Absolutely.
So you're more than welcome to send it to david@centervisionleadership.org.
Or find him in the community.
Or find me in the community. Yeah. It's centervisioncommunity.org.
Yeah.
And
if you use nonprofitcommunity.org, it'll take you to that
it'll
link.
take you that too. See,
Yeah.
we've got them coming from one direction or another. So
we just got off a group session this morning with high-powered leaders helping each other. And Kevin, what you talk about, when leaders get together and build that synergy, we become better if we're associating people that are. I like to hang around people better than me, so that's not hard, but it helps me raise the bar on my own performance. So we try to create that on a regular basis, because it's really hard work being a leader, and sometimes it's kind of lonely. So you need to be in a peer-to-peer place. So you're invited to, hey, submit an article on teamwork to us, and I'll send you a link in an email, and belong to this community, because you can add value because you have a passion for supporting nonprofit leaders. So what do you want to leave people with today?
I would say a couple of things. One is, Hugh, you mentioned that if you don't have people following you, you're not a leader. And people think if they have the title, it makes them a leader, but it doesn't. And so I would say if you want to develop your leadership skills, then take a look at your local church or community, look for an opportunity to serve. There are so many opportunities to serve. If you haven't ever really looked into it, you'll be overwhelmed. But there are a lot of sites. There's a justserve.org. There's a bunch of sites out there that list these things. And you go out and volunteer, leave your authority at the door and walk in with the intent that you're going to engage people, engage their passion, and help them to contribute at high levels. You'll learn how to lead people. If they'll follow you, you'll learn how to lead people the right way. And you can take those skills with you back at work. So that's a good place to start. Another thing is, I would say, look at your team and your team members and look at ways to build their understanding of the overall business, look at the ways to build their capacity to contribute, and get out of the way and let them take responsibility and have the successes that they're looking to have at work.
And go to superchargemyteam.com, superchargemyteam.com. And then you'll find all kinds of resources. And as you've heard today, every one of these is a jewel. So Kevin, you've given us some really good thoughts and challenges to upgrade our own ability. So thank you for being our guest today on the Nonprofit Exchange.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Nonprofit Exchange.